I'm Callie Seckler.
And I'm Tara Merrick.
This is Worth the Watch. Today's movie is The Menu.
We'll be rating the plot, character, sound, visuals, and originality of the film. Each category earns a popcorn bucket.
Or not. First up is plot.
So the plot was organized very, very well in terms of each plot beat was exactly where it should have been, and it flowed incredibly, and it really kept the viewer enthralled. So we really, really enjoyed how it was formatted. And then also the way that they segmented it into using the title cards that weren't just like normal title cards, like part 1, part 2, they were like first course, second course, third course, all the way through the 7th, I believe. And they were, each segment of the plot corresponded with a meal, and they sort of matched each other. And we really, really enjoyed that.
It really brings together the fact that they are at like a fancy dinner, a more expensive dinner. I don't know how often I've had a 7-meal course, but I know that phrase, like a 7-course meal. So I love the way that they use the title cards to extend that idea.
Absolutely.
I also really enjoyed the ending of it. I feel like in psychological thrillers, they kind of annoy me sometimes with their endings because they put the character in this situation where you're just like waiting for something to happen. You're like, there's no way that they are ever going to get out of this situation. And then the movie makes up this stupid reason halfway through the movie to say, hey, they're getting out. But with what this movie did was gave us hints throughout the movie to kind of introduce these ideas to us. More specifically, how the main chef wasn't actually an awful character. He had his reasons, he had his motivations, and with the character, we discovered it, and it kind of just blended really well together to make sense for why he let her go specifically. Mm-hmm. It was not a luck of the draw situation. It wasn't like, she narrowly escaped. Like, she knew what she had to do, and she got herself out of that situation.
It was very deliberate.
I thought it was very good. So we are giving it the bucket for plot.
And then second is characters.
I know I absolutely loved the characters. First off, just the actors, Anya Taylor-Joy and Ralph Fiennes, were just amazing. We all know Ralph Fiennes, he's Lord Voldemort. I know him from Red Dragon, but those are both very specific characters that he played. And this was one of the first times I got to see him in a role where his emotions were really portrayed, and it was such an interesting character that I have not seen before. I've never really watched a chef movie, but it just made so much sense explaining the progression through his life. And then Anya Taylor-Joy's character Margot, whose name isn't even Margot, which we find out halfway through the movie. It's just, she never stopped. It was nowhere close to a flat character. She kept evolving, kept revealing new reasons why we wanted her to get out. We wanted her to succeed. And she was just a likable character while not being like a pushover or like a sweet character. She got her way out of the situation by hard work. And that wasn't just the situation, that was her entire life that we found out later in the film.
Each character had very specific motivations that they stuck to throughout the entire movie that you could see being revealed. Each shot that was on them, you could see more about them, and they were developed very, very well. So we're giving it the bucket for characters. Next up is sound. So when I was first watching this movie, I was not very impressed with the sound because I was focused on the music. And the score in this movie was not exactly a standout piece.
Yeah, it was nothing special. It was just, music used to transition into the next scene, nothing really adding to it. I think that's kind of why we didn't really know it was a psychological thriller at the beginning, because there wasn't really strong, like, scary music or like intense tension-filled music.
But then I thought about it outside of the music and the way that they used crescendos and decrescendos throughout the film. It definitely like played with your emotions, played with your heart rate, and that sort of showed, sort of eased in, almost as if the movie itself was a crescendo.
Absolutely, all of the cooking noises just sounded so, I don't even want to say satisfying, but they did like build away. I often think that knife sounds in movies are ridiculous because knives don't actually make noises, but they used like real life noises and it sounded cool.
Mm-hmm. And then as well as when they had the dining room and the kitchen right next to each other, how they would have the music doing this slow crescendo as your heart rate's going up, the tension's rising. The dining room is full of commotions. They're scared, they're nervous about what's going on, they're all talking. And then in the kitchen, there's no talking, there's just the sound of them cooking. And
until they go, yes, chef, no, chef.
Yeah, until they're all in uniform together. And then when the music reaches its climax and the chef steps into the dining room, the head chef steps out and claps. And the music disappears and it just becomes silent as everyone looks to him.
It's so tension-filled.
But the tension is still there and it is just ratcheted up a million times. So we're definitely giving it the bucket for sound.
Next up is visuals. So as we said before, they're on a secluded island. So truly, if you think about it, this movie is taking place mainly in one room. While it is a dining room with a kitchen right next to it, that is what the whole thing is. And it's not necessarily boring at all. Like almost, I don't even notice that we're in the same room the entire time, not only because of all of the angle switches, but because it truly is like a dining room where there are people around you having their own separate conversations and the camera just picks which table it is staying at. So I think that was a really good way to, move the plot forward, introducing the characters, but it just looked amazing.
It also sort of contributed to how all of the characters were stuck on that island. They were stuck in that room, and the camera barely left that room. Once in a while, you would get a glimpse through a window. You saw the man with the angel wings. You saw when all of the men from the dining room had to run.
She did later in the movie walk to a different place, but we hardly saw the outside. Even when they were running outside, we hardly saw it. They did not focus on the fact. So it was almost like not addressing the fact that they were still on the island worked to help build that claustrophobic atmosphere almost just by not addressing it. It's almost like the character kind of forgets that you're also on the island, or you, the watcher, also forgets that you are on the island until you need to get out, which is another reason why this movie, it was not advertised as a thriller, in my opinion. I did not look at it and think, wow, this is like an average thriller movie. But as you were watching it, it plain as day comes up halfway through the movie with the visual of the honestly startling visual if you didn't really know it was happening. I know it took you more as a jump scare than it took me as a jump scare because I don't know, I was just like, what are they doing with this towel that they're putting on the ground? But it was a very shocking moment in which one of the chefs is told that he is not good enough, and then he commits suicide on screen in front of everybody. And it is just that moment that you are looking at the screen almost like jaw drop, like what is going on?
All of the visual hints were very important in that build up there, and the way that they were done is beautifully. They didn't focus specifically on that tarp, but that tarp was there, and it was in the edge of your vision the entire time. So you're sitting there thinking, what is this tarp for? Why are they laying this out?
And it's not just that scene. It's like every single scene you're seeing things that you don't know are important later, or even hearing things you don't know that are going to be important later. And it's just, this movie just beautifully made their visuals for such a simple, they did not change much of, did not move around much. They stayed in the same place, but still continued to keep the viewer's attention. So that's why we're going to be giving the bucket for visuals.
And then finally is originality. And this movie, we found it was very original. I specifically enjoyed how they managed to mix components from different sorts of TV shows and movies. So obviously this was overall a psychological thriller, but it also had hints of just baking and cooking shows. You saw the close-ups of the food and then the descriptions like you would see in Great British Bake Off. And then you saw the very cinematic shots of the food itself that you see in other cooking shows like The Bear. And then you see also sort of hints of comedy in some of the more comedic characters such as the actors and then the very rich businessmen. And then also in the food descriptions there were little bits of, oh, that's kind of funny, registered there. And it wasn't just slapped together, it was mixed very beautifully and it worked incredibly.
Yeah. I think every single piece of those title cards was a deliberate thing. It started out, I think we even looked over at each other in the middle of the movie and we're like, why are there title cards? Why are they doing that? And then slowly it started to make more sense and it got funnier but also sadder. We talked about the character before who, ended up committing suicide. it was his, like, he created that plate that they had, and they put that in the title card. So in that moment, they were using it as a way of like, oh, this is sad, this is what he worked to create. But then other times it was hilarious when they asked the character at the end of the movie to prove his chefness and made a meal. It just was frankly hilarious.
And the way
I loved
that
it.
throughout the movie they relied on sort of implications. So a lot of stuff was not said outright, such as when Margot's date, who brought her there, dies. His death is never outright said. He's whispered to, he leaves the room, and then you see his feet at one point, and that's how you know that he's died.
A background,
It is never said outright. It is completely background, like you just said.
And that's like, that ties back into how we found out about the characters. Nothing about them is ever flat out said, because these aren't simple characters. They can't be explained in one sentence revealing their entire motivation. No, these are extreme complex characters that you can't sit there and explain about them, or it would have just ruined the entire movie.
This movie did not rely on dialogue. The dialogue was a supplement. It was every single piece of this movie working together is how you understood the plot, and that was done in a very, very smooth, very good way. So
it made the plot of it being like, oh yeah, at the end of the day, it really is just him not liking the rich people and what they take for granted. But never until the end of the movie did I actually fully process that, because a lot of times that is a normal concept that we see in a lot of movies, more used as a metaphor, but it wasn't even like used as a metaphor. This was just a good movie that had its reasoning at the end and frankly made like sense with the movie.
Absolutely. So we are giving it the bucket for originality, which means that the menu has earned itself 5 out of 5 buckets, making it
Worth the watch.